I guess this video is also like books that will make you cry. It is worse than that movie that you made in like grade 8 social studies class for a project. It's fraud. They did fraud. Hey friends, it's Sarah, and today I have a ginormous stack of nonfiction book recommendations for you for Nonfiction November. So I have sort of divided them out into a few different categories. I have like ones about social issues, ones that are like biographies or memoirs. I don't know what this last category is. It's like one's kind of about like a specific topic that's not, it's just like a specific event. And then I have one just like miscellaneous book. So we'll start with the ones that are about social issues. A lot of these ones are ones that I have talked about before, but I just think they're so excellent that they are worth mentioning again in a different video. First off, I have The Inconvenient Indian by Thomas King. This is a history of indigenous people in North America, and it is funny and horrifying and just a really excellent way to learn about the history of indigenous people. I talked about this one in my Indigenous Reads video, which I will link up top and down below. But this is just like so engaging and funny, but also obviously educational, and Thomas King also like inserts his own experiences in it too, which makes it nice and personal as well. Then I have White Tears, Brown Scars, How White Feminism Betrays Women of Color by Ruby Hamad. This one is also in another video. I can't remember which video it is, but I will figure it out and I'll once again link it up top and down below. But this is, as the subtitle suggests, about the ways that white feminism really screws over women of color and really lets down the movement. It's the Bo Burnham like outtake song from Inside.
Shit like this brings the movement down.
It's this. But it talks about how white feminism is really like a tool of the patriarchy, and how it upholds like white supremacy and the patriarchy, and really it's like white women stomping on women of color to get higher up in the world while still maintaining that hierarchy. So it really is a disservice to everyone and is incredibly harmful. But this was very good. As you can see, maybe I have a billion tabs in here, very insightful, and I think like a layer deeper than some of the other books that I've read. Up next, I have Ace, What Asexuality Reveals About Desire, Society, and the Meaning of Sex by Angela Chen. This is, as it suggests, a book about asexuality and like what that looks like in the real world. I really love this because I'm ace, and so I read it and then my boyfriend read it, and it really helped us kind of like understand where the other one was coming from. Yeah, it's not only does it give like non-asexual or allosexual people a look into what the asexual experience is like, but it also kind of reverses it and is like, hey ace people, here's what non-ace people feel like. So that was really interesting. And yeah, it talks about like the whole spectrum of asexuality and like aromanticism as well. And it's just very informative, but once again, like very engaging. It's not dry at all. Final book I have in this category is a chonker. It is How to Survive a Plague, the story of how activists and scientists tamed AIDS by David France. This is also a documentary that is absolutely incredible. I actually watched that first and then ended up buying the book to read up on it even more. So if you have like less time, you can go check out the documentary because it's obviously a lot shorter than reading a 515-page book. But this is incredibly interesting and heartbreaking. It details the AIDS epidemic in the 80s, but it really shows how the queer community were the ones who managed to basically be the whole healthcare system for members of their community who got AIDS, and just the absolute like devastating effects of that epidemic and the way that the governments just completely left them on their own. It was also just like an incredible look into the work the activists do and the way that they had to, you know, they're just like random people, but they had to learn about like lobbying and politics and medicine in order to provide medical care to themselves and to the others in their community because the government had just left them to die. So it's, I don't want to say inspiring because it's like really sad. It's devastating, but it's also like an incredible testament to the work that these people did. So I would really recommend you check it out, but be warned, it is quite sad. Next up, we have memoirs or biographies, autobiographies, all that kind of genre. So first up, we have one of my favorite books of last year, Know My Name by Chanel Miller. I've talked about this one in like a billion videos, but it is the story of Chanel Miller, who unfortunately was the victim in the Stanford rape case. And this is her side of the story. She published like an anonymous piece, I think through BuzzFeed, about like her experience, and then she decided that it was important for her to be seen publicly and to like reveal her name, to be like, hey, I am the person behind this. You know, it's really personalizing it, and as a way to kind of process this horrific thing that happened to her and like all the trial and everything afterwards, she wrote a book about it, and it is just beautiful and like lyrical and will make you cry. I keep meaning to reread this, but it's really heavy and I have to be prepared to like cry and just be sad for a few days afterwards. But it is so good and I highly recommend it. If you only ever read one memoir in your life, I think this should be it. The next memoir I have is Somebody's Daughter by Ashley C. Ford. This is a very short book, so if you're like, it's getting towards the end of the year, I haven't hit my Goodreads goal, I need a bunch of like short books, this could be one of them. It's only 210 pages and it's like super, you just fly through it. So Ashley's father was incarcerated when she was very young and he was in jail for 20 years. And so this is a story of her growing up with her kind of a toxic, abusive mother and imagining her father, and like, you know, she wrote to him and stuff, but kind of imagining who he might be and like what her life would be like if he was in it. And then he gets released and her kind of confronting the reality of him and like what the crime was that he committed. And it's just, it's heartbreaking again. Why am I choosing all the heartbreaking books? I don't know, but this is incredibly heartbreaking, and it really delves into like relationships as they are versus like the imagined relationships we think we could have with people, and the reality of like people being very complex and letting you down. And it's just, ugh, I just want to give little baby Ashley a hug because this poor girl went through so much. So, great. Up next is not a sad one. It did make me cry, but that is The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King. So this is a biography about Mr. Rogers, the iconic children's TV presenter, and like his life and his work. And it's so heartwarming. Like the stuff about his early life, I was not as keen on. It was good, but it wasn't as interesting as like when they started doing like Mr. Rogers and talking about how like different that show was than a lot of stuff that was on TV, that it was very like slow and calm and not the like crazy antics that a lot of kids' TV shows were, and just like the way that he was so kind to children and just like to everyone. And it's not like, it's like, yeah, he was what you see on the TV show. He was very kind, empathetic, very like thoughtful, and just a swell guy. Yeah, this made me sob just because it's so nice. It was just some of the stories about how lovely he was just made me really cry. So I guess this video is also like books that will make you cry in both good and bad ways. I don't know. So up next I have Astronaut's Guide to Life on Earth by Chris Hadfield, who is a Canadian astronaut. He was the first Canadian commander of the International Space Station. He's this guy in the back. And he would also like do YouTube videos where he like answered kids' science questions in space and like taught you about stuff. And then he also like had his guitar and sang in space, and it was just so cool. It was really like, I was not really around for like the Canadarm thing, so like Chris Hadfield is like my defining like Canadians in space moment. But this talks about his journey into like becoming an astronaut, what that entails, as well as his experience on the International Space Station, basically his like whole career as an astronaut. But it's also a little bit not quite like motivational, but he does talk about, like working towards your dreams and like what that means and how much work that takes. I thought he was a very captivating writer, and he's really just such an inspirational person. But I think it also really kind of like hit home for me, like how much stuff you have to know to be an astronaut. Like he was a test pilot, so he would fly like crazy jets, and then you have to know like math and all sorts of like science, and you have to learn other languages. Like you had to learn Russian in order to be an astronaut, and that's just like this crazy stuff that like I never really thought about. But it's, yeah, I think it's just really interesting look into this incredibly like out there career and like what it really entails, and which is like a lot. It's a lot, guys. You gotta be like 110% all the time to be an astronaut. It's insane. But yeah, just very interesting. Okay, now we're getting into the books about a specific period of time, or not period of time. Now we're getting into books that are about like a specific event or thing. So first up, one of my all-time favorite nonfiction books is Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer. This book like changed my personality. It really got me into books about like Everest disasters specifically, a little bit like just, kind of about climbing mountains and that sort of thing in general, but like I'm really into books about Everest disasters. In fact, down here, I can't see, this shelf down here kind of at the bottom that you can sort of see is full of books about Everest and like mountain disasters. This one is about the 1996 avalanche on Everest that killed a whole bunch of people. Jon Krakauer was on the expedition as a writer, and so this is like his story of that horrific event that like killed, I can't remember how many people it was. So yeah, 9 people actually died during this event in May of 1996, and Jon Krakauer was sent along kind of as a writer for a magazine to write about like climbing Everest, what's that like? And instead ended up writing like, here's how dangerous Everest is, about like this really horrifying catastrophe on the mountain where 9 people died. And it's gripping and it's very intense, and it is just so fascinating, the lengths that people will go to like climb mountains. They're just like, what did I read? I read another book about mountain disasters, and they're like, mountain climbers aren't crazy. And I'm like, maybe not, but they are certainly of a different breed. They just, the drive and the willingness to like take incredible risks for, I don't know, a couple like 10 minutes up on top of the like world's highest peak. And you're risking, your entire life, and you've paid like tens of thousands of dollars, and it's just crazy. It was also really interesting reading about what oxygen deprivation does to your brain, because I've also read other people's books about this expedition, like other people who were on the mountain when this catastrophe happened and who managed to survive as well. And the like discrepancies between the books are so interesting, because like you can't know who is right, and because they're also like deprived of oxygen up at the top of or near the top of the mountain, that they aren't thinking straight, and they can't, like, you can't know who was telling the truth, not because anyone's lying, but like who was actually aware of the reality of the circumstance, who was hallucinating, who was like mistaken. So it's very interesting reading all of these different books kind of as a collective body of work. But this one, I think this is the one that got me into disaster books and like reading books about that 1996 catastrophe. And I still think it is the most interesting one because he is like a writer by profession. So that just makes it stand out like a little bit more than some of the other ones. But highly recommend if you want something that reads almost like a thriller, but it's real, this is the one for you. Then I have, this is almost like a memoir as well, actually, but this is The Disaster Artist by Greg Sestero and Tom Bissell. I don't even know how to describe this book. The subtitle is My Life Inside the Room, the Greatest Bad Movie Ever Made. And if you don't know what The Room is, let me enlighten you. So The Room is this horrible movie. It's so bad. It is worse than like student films. It is worse than that movie that you made in like grade 8 social studies class for a project. It's worse than that. It's made by this guy called Tommy Wiseau, and he is very mysterious and has a whole bunch of money from, I don't know, and he's from Europe somewhere, he won't say where, and he is just like the most bizarre man you will ever encounter. But he decides to write, produce, direct, and star in a movie called The Room. And it's just the most bizarre experience ever. It's so bad that like it's become kind of a cult classic where little indie theaters will have screenings of it, and then like kind of similar to like Rocky Horror Picture Show screenings, the audience will come dressed up sometimes, but they'll like know the lines and they'll shout things at the screen. And one of the like most famous things in these showings is that when they did the set dressing for one of the apartments, like The Room, in the like living room, instead of like having someone decorate it, Tommy Wiseau went out and purchased a like living room set up in like a window in like a furniture store, just like bought the whole thing and then went and put it in their set. And so everything in that room is like just the model from a furniture store, including the picture frames. They did not put anyone's pictures in there. It's just like random stock photos from the furniture store. So they have like random pictures of spoons in picture frames, and they just never changed it. So anytime that the audience sees one of those like framed pictures of spoons, everyone yells spoons and then throws plastic spoons around the room. It's so fun. I've been to a few of them, and it's such a good time. Even better if you've had maybe like 1 or 2 drinks before, but it's just the most bizarre experience ever. And if you have a chance to go to one of these screenings, please do. They're so fun. I would suggest reading up on like the things you're supposed to say during the film before, just so you kind of know. But even if you don't, it's fine. You just bring a bag full of plastic spoons, and when you see a spoon on a screen, just throw the spoons. Anyways, but then this is the story of the other cast member, Greg Sestero, and he was kind of like Tommy Wiseau's friend as well. They lived together during various times, and it's just like insane. This poor man, like, Tommy Wiseau has got to be like the most delusional guy ever, because everyone else on the set was like, this is really bad, and he was like, I'm making a masterpiece, and he would just make very bizarre like filming and like financial decisions and stuff. But this book is so funny, it's so interesting, it's an incredible glimpse into the making of that horrifying movie. But then also Greg talks about like his work as an actor and kind of like what it's like trying to make it as an actor in Hollywood. And I actually went to one of the screenings where he was there, and he like talked about, there's kind of like a Q&A sort of thing, and then you could also get the script. So I do have a copy of the original script, which is somehow worse than what is on screen, which I didn't think was possible, but it is significantly worse than what's on screen. This is just so funny. It's just hilarious. But then also, like, Greg really writes about Tommy with, like, such tenderness, because he's like, this is my friend. He's, like, the weirdest dude I know, but it is my friend. And so it's just, like, very, like, heartfelt and warm, but also, like, a nightmare of a movie to make. So so funny. Go watch The Room, not by yourself. Go find a screening of The Room, and then read this book. And then they also made a movie out of The Disaster Artist, which was okay, but really just read the book. Next up is a very bizarre one. Anyone who knows me will be like, Sarah, what? But I saw a documentary again in one of my psychology classes, and then I was like, I'm gonna read the book about this because this is fascinating. And that is The Smartest Guys in the Room by Bethany McLean and Peter Elkind. This is about Enron. There is like a short, like I think it's half hour, maybe to an hour documentary on, I think it's on YouTube actually, you can find it. That's called The Smartest Guys in the Room, and like that's really good. This just goes a lot more in depth again into like the people behind Enron and like how they falsified everything, because basically they were, listen, I'm not an economics person, so I might explain this wrong, but basically they were lying about like how much money they had and how well they were doing so that their stocks would go up and then they would get more money, but they weren't actually like doing that well. It's fraud. They did fraud, and then they got found out, and then it crashed, and their whole business exploded and like the top people were arrested and someone committed suicide. It's a whole thing, but it's also just kind of like insane. The top, like the head honchos in this company who just like did all sorts of horrifying things, but the way they just would like spend money and the lives that they were living based entirely on a lie. So this one's definitely like a bit more technical. It gets into like the nitty-gritty financial details, but I still thought it was pretty interesting, and like I could follow it, so you can probably follow it too. Honestly, like the audacity. This book is just the audacity of the Enron guys. Last one in this category, and that is The Library Book by Susan Orlean. Every time I see this book in like a library or a bookstore, I'm like, I should pick it up. And I'm like, you own a copy. But I love this book so much. This is about a fire in a library in Los Angeles in, when was that? The 80s. But it's also about like the history of libraries and like the importance of them and how they like fit in your life. And the first time I read this, I cried because I just love libraries so much, and this made me think about like going to the library every week with my mom when I was a kid, and we'd go and pick out books, and like I still go to that same library today and pick up my books and my holds, and it's so lovely. Libraries are so good. But so it talks about just like the history of libraries, the importance of libraries, and then it's also sort of like almost a true crime story about this like fire that happened in a library in LA, because it was a case of arson. So it's so good. And also all the chapters begin with like a few book like listings, like library listings, where it's, you know, like this chapter 1, stories to begin on, begin now to enjoy tomorrow, a good place to begin. So all the book titles are related to what's happening in the chapter, which is just so cool. So like, please, read this. It's for all the book lovers out there. If you've ever been to a library, read this book. It's so good. It's so beautiful. Okay, last book. This does not fit into any of the categories really, but it is The Anthropocene Reviewed by John Green, the man, the myth, the legend. So this book started out as a podcast, also called The Anthropocene Reviewed, where John Green would take an aspect of the human experience. It could be like Diet Dr. Pepper, or like a can of geese, or watching a sunset, or our capacity for wonder. Just stuff like that, and then rates it on a 5-star scale and gives it a review, almost like this is Yelp, but for the human experience. And then he took some of them from there and then wrote some new ones as well and turned it into a beautiful book, which also kind of serves as a memoir. So maybe this could have gone in the memoir category. Anyways, but it does, like, as he talks about these different things, he does kind of talk about different periods in his life and things that have happened to him. So it is like a more intimate look into his life, as well as just like what it's like to be a human, because it's very weird being a human. And this is very like beautifully written. It's very touching, and it's just so like gives you like the warm fuzzies for being alive and living life. And I'm pretty sure it made me cry, and my boyfriend also loved it. So there you go. But I think it's full of like wisdom, and it's beautiful, and there's so many good like messages in here. Like I was just looking, and he's like, there's one part where he says, when you have the microphone, what you say matters, even when you're just kidding. It's so easy to take refuge in the just of just kidding. It's just a joke. We're just doing it for the memes. But the preposterous and absurd can still shape our understanding of ourselves and one another. And ridiculous cruelty is still cruel. Also, that was in an essay about Nathan's famous hot dog eating contest. So just the kind of like absurdity, but then like the beautiful and the poetic and the wise within that. He also narrates the audiobook, so I have that on hold from the library right now because I like listening to him and I want to hear him read this. But then also there's the whole podcast, so you can listen to that as well. It's so beautiful. I think this is his best work ever. I like his YA stuff as well, but this just really just makes me feel good about life, which can be tough sometimes. So those are my 6 billion recommendations for nonfiction November. It was a lot. I had a really hard time narrowing them down. Surprisingly, this is a narrowed down list. I decided to just choose ones that I actually physically own and not just all the ones that I've read. because it definitely could have been longer. But hopefully there's some sort of nonfiction in there for you. I feel like I covered a wide range of topics, everything from mountain disasters to economic collapse. I'm sure there's something you would enjoy in there, hopefully. I don't know. Thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope to see you next time. Now go read a book, which I will link up top. That side, I can never remember. I haven't hit my good readings goal, good readings, and I thought he was just a very captivating writer. Ooh, I thought he was a very captivating, oh my goodness, a more intimate look into him and his life. Into him sounds weird. So good, so good, so good.